Crime triangle. He was born on December 14, 1996 in Istanbul. He completed his university education in Eastern languages, Persian, Arabic and Ottoman, translation and interpretation. He wrote his first stories and articles during his university education and published them in various media. The author, whom we feel that expressionism motifs are used in his works, wishes that all his works that he wrote or will write be related to the tendency towards spiritual, inner, imaginary and outer desires. To think means to dream, the emptiness of two worlds, and thinking means getting closer to yourself. My soul is your truth. You are the one who gives me strength. And I am a blood overflowing from the ground. You are the one who gives me life. All of you are rooted in my soil. You are the one who will attain eternity. I am your blood, you are my soul. Looking at my image in the middle of two worlds. First it overflows, then it surprises you with what you can't see. I was prematurely veiled to hide the misery of a satiety. I undressed myself. You can only experience loneliness as the plague of another age. He could balance it. This work you will read is accompanied by voices coming from your soul. Society that could not cope and turn them into resources are the plague lines of his puppet. To the reader. Dear reader. Some of what I write is a product of my inner world and a life story that I created to touch upon the points I was inspired by as the things we saw flow into the unconscious. I am not a person who tries to shade his body with his hair. However, it has been a lot of times when my hair looks for its shade. Although it is rather pointless to question the reason for this, I think it is because everything that belongs to me has an order. I can say with certainty that over time, everything that did not belong to you caused your back to bend and lead you to live close to the ground. This must have been what they were talking about. From the ground, close to the ground, and all means ultimately. Of course I don't live underground, but I didn't live above ground either. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. Since I couldn't see any further, I couldn't talk about the other situation. Because if I could talk about it, you wouldn't be able to accompany the fact that a person who struggles between the two organizes a crowded crime procession with his own funeral. Man keeping a bird in the cage was not due to the inclination of the cage to the bird. Nor was it related to man's linking the freedom of the bird to the reasoning of the cage. The bird had to be the size of a cage. Because the other situation could not be a situation that the bird and the human could handle. If it did, we would need another eye. Even though I was aware that this was not possible, I could not wait to face the fact that the stage where a bird could breathe was not in a cage. Your dear face looks very angry with itself. A sarcastic tone, a shameful future code. Your dear face, beneath a mischievous brow devoid of submission. It reminds me of a guest love hand. Your beloved face was the never dry, damp alleys of the cross seasons. You were an unconventional apocalypse. Your beloved face was the celebration society of all unacceptable shame. It meant the blood and fire of a centuries-old age. Your beloved face, the silence of a gunpowder mill. A green cover between the ruined bridge. It was an abandoned but habitable fiction of order. Your beloved face, between the plagues of a centuries-old age. The shame of the abandoned sentences in books. The gap between the nails of an age without nails was the fault of your face. Your face is not mine, I cannot put the troubles of my face through your crop. Save me from the trouble of this unlocked order. And forgive me from the cruelty of this age. When a circle is passed through a circle, we become part of a knot. One day, the knot will become blind, and people who have not yet made sense of their lives will not be able to breathe in this knot and will perish. They have now withered their roots. Know that the lives coming from them will only be slaves of this circle. First part. Hereditary life gaps. It was a previously familiar dream in no disguise. We were all in the rush of our own hunger and left a mark with the invitation of the bites we ate, in the dream of a faint farewell. Not every living thing that breathes lives. If he were alive, he wouldn't be breathing. Every breath hides the fate that will take your breath away in the line of its own mist. That's why the fight between living and not living is the most painful argument in our lives. See, pain is not just an insidious pain. Pain is a memory, and every body has a memory between itself and the order it has established. Of course, it is difficult to breathe inside the interlocked knot, but in which direction that knot will open indicates an unknown infinity, and this is the most extraordinary state of eternity. Because every living thing hides the reflection of its body in the void of that knot that takes its breath away. When this reflection falls into the shadow, our roots either rot the ground or fill the ground. He who seeks his existence even in the dark will bear everyone's pain when there is light. This is a criminal procession, and in this criminal procession, everyone will find a fool who makes everyone laugh or cry because of his own nature, even if he is not looking for a fool who shares the pain that spreads through his body. Everything here was as much as the people, and that was all they were. Thoughts were waiting on the other side of the stage to take their place in a coherent manner. Probably no one had any intention of giving them space. The atmosphere consisted of the joyful laughter of low-voiced, rather dull and unhappy people. This situation was like a resentful time waiting for the sun that has not yet risen. After waiting for a long time, they found themselves in the middle of a frost, so they could not move away from their winter faces and got quite close. Anything more than that wouldn't be possible. The other side of the curtain did not want to show itself yet, and even if it tried to open it, it was struggling with all its strength to return to the side inside itself. Of course, the ending of something would turn back towards the direction it started. This was possible. But ending the performance of a play that had never started meant succumbing to this situation. In this matinee, a very large play scene appeared around our prayers. Everyone, big or small, gathered around this stage. For the sake of the immortality of a moment they would live, they were moving randomly on the stage, carrying each other's glasses overflowing with loud laughter. Yes, from afar they could only be said to have performed an action. As I got closer to them, I was reflecting the sign of the dirty smell that clung to their bodies onto the entire floor of the stage, and I was celebrating the way people danced in amazement at this sight. But this celebration left me with only a sob. The sound of my hiccups only bothered me, as it was quite noisy. I was able to be the spokesperson of the order I established for myself in a body that was not mine, and finally I was able to get a little closer to my body. Was the person still resembling a person in the crowd? Or is it the effort of a self-repetitive creature to self-destruct with the same limbs? I think it was possible. Man was a perfect fit for destroying the living or giving breath to the inanimate. For centuries, all of life's misdeeds were first arguably spread over the human body. Since this would be the most terrible appearance of a plague that has ever gained dimension, we were all looking for mirrors in each other's shadows. Since a human's burial is directly proportional to the sprouting of a plant, their underground life cycle has already managed to overshadow each other's flaws. No one would believe that a giant group of people had a purpose on Earth. The bodies, which do not attempt to step back from this scene and do not like this situation, seem to rant for years to hold their own souls accountable. We met suddenly. I recognized myself from my reflection in the mirror. Unfortunately, I have never been this hungry for a coincidence. Look at the wisdom that the mirror hanging on the wall gave me. Oh, I'm such a fool. The more we could exist, the more we could take shape. Although we could not achieve this, we were able to choose the appropriate costume from the costumes in the society that reminded the world and take the shape required by our existence. We, whose two eyes do not appear in the room, who seek the gloomy shadow of the moon in the circle of the sun, who prefer to stay in the age we are in, could not even take a step from this scene. We were dragging our bones from place to place in a constant hurry to reach the middle of the stage. The loud sound we made was causing us to grind a little more every day, and we were getting old. Of course, everything new will get old one day. It's not just about that, but being indifferent to the old and indifferent to the new may be one of the things we do best. When we slept, the memory of the past stuck on our faces every night. We had to continue the day with the same feelings as we could not get rid of this cover. In order to get rid of the feelings clinging to his flesh and blood, man drags his own world towards hope in the grip of an inescapable morning. But it is not known whether the crew's bed called hope is one of the meanings that people attribute to it. It was now a sky lantern representing our childhood, shining like a venom when we close our inaccessible eyes. Second part. The silence of dried roots. A root will dry up only when the life water donated to it is cut off. A sun that rises alone does not miss the day as much as a dried life means that it is cut off from life. It's like every rootless life spreads a hereditary loneliness. I would like to tell you about the flaws that a situation will cause in itself. Man's only guide is himself. But since he was not satisfied with his role, he could not find the opportunity to do this because he was stuck in other people's souls and expected to live there. Unfortunately, throughout our lives we were wasting time to identify with the language of other souls. Whereas we would all be representations of each other, the way to be human was to be fully human. As a matter of fact, we couldn't. We were repeating the time in the sun every day in pursuit of an imitation. Even though time wanted us to avoid repeating ourselves, we were saying goodbye to ourselves at the end of a prayer and half a smile because we gave it this chance. However, our smile was the most special gift that could belong to us. Existence has never been so crowded. In every shadow that appeared, my search for my own identity had followed me since I was a child. This was a celebration that connected the lights of a crowded stage to my existence. I had to disguise myself in order for the light to follow me, and this was a situation where a situation that could cause me to extinguish my light brought me back to the stage. The saddest part was that I still hadn't figured out how many disguises I needed to get out of here. The name of the stage was Company Dictation. The clock was waiting on the other side of time, walking around in a manner that would displace everyone, as if it would arrive first when its turn came, and its feet were making a sound as if a steel bullet was being discharged. I am here. He was pulling everyone to him to say here you go. The sad thing was that this situation emerged on the periphery of vague words coming from the notebook of an anonymous person. Everything was overdue now. This was the best thing for people anyway. Man took refuge in this time so much that the concept of time lost its meaning for him. He was hosting here the shadowless people who were making deep cuts on his hands every day. Man loved time the most, and as a matter of fact, time lost its meaning where there was no man. Of course, past time did not begin with the birth of a snail. If that were the case, we wouldn't be taking part in this matinee. However, I can explain it like this: the reason why snails can move slowly is because of their self-confidence. This is the same for turtles. They do not need time to escape from the enemy. When they were born, they were equipped with very hard shells to protect themselves from animals that would choose them as prey. I guess it must have deeply affected me that a being that seemed so weak was so powerful and simultaneously did not need any being other than itself. I can explain the human situation as follows: since our shield starts with our conscience filter, we were creating living space in all our holes so that they could breathe, instead of repelling the enemies that would harm us. Unfortunately, over time, this caused our underground roots to rot and our identities to mix with the essence of other bodies. Dear reader, of course, pain is painful, but when a person takes a few turns around the pain, he will not limp as much as before, and he can find his balance because his feet will get calluses. This is also the case in reptiles. However, since it would not be possible to be so underground and breathe on the earth, I will not be able to do any mischief in this regard. Third part. Life Constellation of Spiritual Mornings. The moment I was born, that scene that called me from a few years ago, even though it didn't date back that long, was the celebration of my own tears. I opened my eyes here because the people around me were accompanying this celebration before I was born. When I opened my eyes, I could see that the surroundings consisted of a black shadow, that people were contradicting themselves to pay their debts to time, or that all identities were multiplied for the same purpose. Yes, until now we have been able to prove ourselves with our identities. But now I was watching that this was not the case. The company dictation was reminiscent of the celebration scene of all the repetitions that have been experienced and possible to be experienced on Earth. A hole had formed around our eyes because of the longing we felt for ourselves, and putting a longing to sleep in that hole every night would grant us the most beautiful mornings. A breath was hidden in the deep sinkholes that appeared at the edges of this pit. What caused these sinkholes throughout our lives, or, without falling short of this, was the situation where the sentences at the same point gave a concrete meaning within themselves. This company is a big repetition of the small mourning caused by the inexperience of those who could not be in life and were not accompanied in life. This tradition has caused the hole in the soul to deepen over time. This place belongs only to those who have decided on the form of mourning for their body. Spiritual mourning reflects the mocking dominance of the power that overshadows a prayer to portray the pain of existence. Mourning was an attitude of pleading and disguised pain to be included in life. Because pain could only make itself felt when it was obvious. He was resentful of his disorder, an order that would never be concrete. Dear reader, even pain has its own accumulated resentments. We were so visible that he could only exist with the smile of our shadow. Look how painful it is. The inside of the world was the spectacle of a stage. We were born right in the middle of the scene, and with our limbs changing shapes to keep up with it, we sat cross-legged at the foot of the order in which others wanted to live. Here we were, in a rush to catch our breath, raising our hands in the middle of the show. This was the farewell scene of our own destruction. For this reason, we could decide the form of our mourning ourselves and say goodbye to the body we were in whatever form we wanted. Yes, such a despicable idea could of course have no merit. But I see that having a qualification was the heaviest burden the world could ever want to bear, and because we shared that burden, we probably didn't yet grasp what that meant. This was life for us, we couldn't take shelter beyond that, and even if we did, we couldn't shelter here. Of course, there is a description that comes to mind when it comes to humans. Man was not a being consisting of 2 legs and many bones. Man was not an erected monument whose shoulders were like the claws of freedom and whose majestic shadow was built for the carcasses of reptiles. Dear reader, of course it is not a person's duty to hold reptiles accountable or to create a corner to share their grief. A person wants to live in a place where he will be accepted. The other situation is entirely related to our conscience. Forgive me. Fourth part. On the concept of human. Human beings are the mother of all living beings on Earth. All organisms on Earth first wanted to dominate the human body. The whole of the roots rotting underground represents a pile of worlds waiting for the remains separated from their mothers to turn into a spiritual reflection as time passes. The integrity of the universe is achieved as long as humans exist, and each human being has his own void on Earth that he can fill. A human being is a being who is involved in life in order to breathe, to multiply as he breathes, and to maintain a life granted to him in the most justified way. From the moment he opens his eyes, man is a dead end of repetition, pursuing a constant action, trying to strengthen his defense mechanism, adorning himself with various disguises and displaying the power to create a resource for people around him who resemble him. Dear reader, all these years we believed that we could be the equivalent of the word described as human. I am aware. But the real problem is that explaining a concept that has not been fully felt could cause the wounds on my body to multiply around itself. I see that what was different in all of us was actually stuck at the end of a point and we could not go beyond this point. Even though we went, we were trying to get away from this situation with the worry of reaching impossible results. Life was all about getting away and getting closer. The farther we were away, the more we were born, and the closer we were accompanying everyone to be born again. Yes, what an unusual range of layouts, isn't it? After all, looking for disorder in the order is a pretty deafening dream, I know. But the stage is so crowded around that I couldn't think beyond writing to explain it. Have you ever had a savior who buzzed over your dead body with the feeling of a mosquito, repeating the sentences you repeated to yourself, and gave hope to other carcasses? Viz. There could be no savior for this, of course. If it had happened, I probably wouldn't be living in the corner of a bittersweet feeling like writing these, like the embarrassment of a child trying to get involved in life. I was seeing that everything that was missing would one day be too much, or that everything that was too little would one day reach the limit. If I hadn't seen it, I would have thought that this journey through myself got stuck in a swamp and was looking for shapes for its carcass to rot there. Dear reader, trying to exist in such a selfish scene has been tiring me for a long time. Since I didn't know where to turn on the lights, I couldn't predict where the lights would turn off. I used to vomit every night, hugging the neck of this order I had created around my dirty body. I was vomiting so much that when I thought about how I could consume so much food at the same time for so many years, I was both mocking and reproaching myself. Even though I prayed for the crowd around the stage to be this full, I was trying to digest it first because I knew we weren't all on the same path. I think that's why I've been full for years. Because the fullness I felt in my stomach could not be explained otherwise. We agree that my stomach is full. Have you ever had a gap where the bites you eat when you are full will expand the hunger inside you even more? The emptiness inside me had turned into such a deep hole while I was alive that I couldn't figure out how many bodies I would have the right to eat to feed it. Even though the reality of life could not be reflected, no power could argue that we would have to execute each other every day in order to live in this place of imprisonment. If they did, I wouldn't have the courage to describe it right now. Fifth chapter. Distorted identity nausea. Having to sigh for the rest of my life in order to be with a routine day of a strange night would be the first feeling I'd want to hold back. If a person is old enough to give up the feelings bestowed upon the world, it is necessary to suspect that there is something about to deteriorate there. Dear reader, see, this is the heaviest of doubts. I have struggled with this weight for years. I think the work of the crowd on this stage is just the layers I created in my brain. These layers had become so much of me over time that it was an unmistakable fact that they had a great effort in my thinking that my body was a trust. Years later, I saw myself naked on this stage, at the very beginning of an impossible or never-ending road. This place meant a power as empty as a dream repeating itself, committing suicide with its own hands. I was watching the breathing of a foreign breath from afar. As I took a step, my body was taking shape in the trace of that breath. I think I paid the debt of this breath for years by not being able to match my own body. This is where the basis of my fatigue came from. Now I was able to resolve the situation. I agree, everything begs for an end. I can't hide that the numbness weighs heavily on me. My eyelids complained of not being able to go with their own flow in a breathless order, and I was a poor person who wished not to see in front of what he saw. When he wasn't that brave, I didn't know how I was able to climb the steps of this order I lived in and why I found myself outside of this scene. Dear reader, why could I stay out while everyone else was together? I shouldn't have been the one to watch them. Strangely enough, I couldn't handle this situation, and as they moved, I moved a little further away from my viewing seat. When I walked away, everything calmed down and the seasons, captive to their own winds, were shedding their leaves on my lap. Since this scene took me so far away from myself, the extent of my pain would perhaps lead to a loneliness that would last for long distances. Have you ever been lonely for a lifetime, hoping to catch up with yourself? The journey was quite long. It seems very difficult for me to tell you what I heard during my journey, I cannot be so out of time. But I must say this, even if the extent of a pain has not yet reached the point it wants to reach, make you feel its pain from the farthest. A pain is that strong. Man is a being who avoids being involved in life in order to hide the pain of all the pains that are close to him and to cover them with the pain of an age. Man is a prisoner of a punishment waiting to be forgiven somewhere outside the age to which he belongs. If there is a victim at the end of every punishment scene, it is the human conscience. I had forgotten my face. Maybe there were billions of innocent smiles on my face. I didn't remember what time it was when I gave up on myself. I had accompanied him a long time ago, but I did not want to see him, knowing so little about him, because I had not yet come to my senses. Now I could see, the smell of the clothes he was wearing made everyone dance and he seemed to be making fun of this situation and bragging about their poor state. The morning we bid farewell to with this laughter could be heard even from the deepest pit. So much so that when it was dark, the sun rose, and when the sun rose, it became dark. We were all in our disguises, we left our breaths far away because we had come a long way, and we were indebted to ourselves. A single breath would pay the debt of everything we have earned throughout our lives. Dear reader, why was this scene repeating my voice to me like a pit, and the more it did, the more soil it covered me with? Were we this far underground? I guess I wasn't born yet. If I had been born, I would be in life, right? Really, did every living thing that was born live in a world? Or did each world have flaws that it concealed for all people? I ask you, were we all gathered around this triangle to celebrate the mourning of the imperfections around us? A flaw is like a faint stain. When saying goodbye to a body, all people first greet each other with a faint farewell prayer. Because every flaw waits for its time to stand out. Of course, every person has a flaw they hide in their body. All the things we want to see on earth are considered as flaws as the things we have seen. Even if the mother of hereditary gaps in the crowd has given birth to defects. I must have missed it, it didn't suit me to stay out of such a harmonious matinee, I had a problem with it because it didn't suit me anyway. I won't deal with the other situation right now. It was impossible for me to think about it because I couldn't see the end of the matinee. I was able to witness not what people live here on earth, but that they lead their lives in the order of a world they could not live in. I am in the grip of a stampede stuck in a mess, a pile full of identities, which I cannot follow yet. A person should not be stuck, should be able to feel that he is breathing, and should live with peace of mind knowing the direction of the outgoing breath. Imitations were causing all kinds of wounds on the human body, and my body, which was getting sick day by day, was incapacitating the other. Just as the form of our mourning was the same, the size of the wounds on our bodies were now the same. Chapter 6. Life is a celebration of repetition. I wanted to exist with my body, which I belonged to the world, in the shadow of a flawless nature, buried in the silent cries of an evening of fault. My life was overshadowed by an attitude created by silent crowds accompanied by their very distinguished laughter. So much so that no one could choose each other from the crowd, and even if he could see it, he still preferred to run around the stage to avoid it. But there was a fact that should be known, the beginning and end of the scene were built for different farewells of the same direction. Therefore, we were stuck between the curtains of an entrance from which there was no way out. In order to get out of here, I had to get rid of the dirty fabrics I was wearing. After all, I was here for a reason and one breath would end it. The company's dictation was a stage of unparalleled beauty and size that covered the earth. Everything that happened here was growing around the stage and taking shape over time. Nobody is alone. Everyone was walking around here with their shadow tied to their back, and although they were trying not to let it slip away, unfortunately they were not successful. Even though the shadows had never seen their owners, everyone was able to hide each other's sins due to the chaos. After all, there was one truth, everyone was running here to take shelter under each other's shadow. Even though he found a place to sit, he could not find a place for his shadow due to the crowd around him. This situation caused us to race with time and keep up with the size of the shadows that came between us. Since the volume of the stage was quite large, it was not clear whose shadow we were with or whose rush we existed. There was only one thing that mattered, and that was our footsteps. Although the mighty bodies attributed their pain to the waste of the sound they made from the heels of their feet, this was the most bare reality that overshadowed the silence around. This was a situation where a certain situation was dragged into uncertainty. Even though not every identity can find shape in the world, every body is crowded with the desire to search for its own identity in the world. As I witnessed the crowd making an empty noise, the imperfection of the world I was in was becoming more evident day by day. From the moment I was born, I tried to keep up with life. Maybe I would just stand there, but everyone was moving. I had to start somewhere to catch up with them. I don't know how many years I have been acting or how many hours I have been thinking. All I knew was that I had been here for a long time, and I hadn't left here for a long time anyway. I was so absorbed in my existence with those who had begun to act or think before me that I could not pause. Even though I did not hesitate to criticize myself on this issue, everything was before me in its simplest form. But I was trying with all my strength not to see it. After all this time, the pain in my limbs had given way to a deep space, and as I moved, the rocks thrown into me formed small slits in my back. There, billions of living beings would be able to breathe, stand and feel. Because I did not know that it is meaningless to catch up with everything behind time, that they disappear behind time, or that going so far back in time can make us very tired. There was no condition of time. For this reason, he would lean his head on any space he found and fall asleep there for a long time. Time is the real owner of the order in life, and people are the supporting players of time. Not being seen means not being aware. A person wants to be the most obvious of what he is aware of, not the invisible one. As time fills the scene with its emptiness, we were witnessing the faint selves wandering around rejoicing in their own laughter. This smile would not last forever. We would actually stop when we realized that the times that were possible to live were over. There were various silhouettes around the stage that characterized our presence. Since only we could feel the bottom of these silhouettes, we gave them the opportunity to accompany us. Even though our eyes were open, we were opening the curtain of a dream, and every word here was a representation of a mission. In this company, since we were the only spokespeople, the guises of the adjectives that appeared were not visible from a distance. Since we couldn't get close to them, we couldn't predict what color cover they would appear under, and we were appearing in this dead end. It was a kind of representation of extinction. Since the lifeless souls would be washed here first, it did not matter what they were put on. It didn't matter which scent was present. It seems that they would be able to visit their own graves all day long, since they would always be simple no matter what the situation posed. Chapter 7. The Hereditary Gaps of Blind Souls. Dear reader, of course, a living creature that survived could not have a funeral. However, living life as a flaw in this existence will cause us to accompany our own funeral as long as we live. Unfortunately, this is the most serious of deaths. Because an existence that does not know that it is alive takes the form of a life that is deprived of ending its breath when the time and place comes. This was possible at that stage of life. A life that had a beginning would of course have an end. I saw that this had an attitude equivalent to all repeated situations. Even though life could not restrain itself at some point, we trained ourselves to achieve this, and from the moment we thought we had achieved it, we would leave it unfinished and take on another role. When this role spread over time, it became inevitable to breathe the dirty air around. Those who caused this were able to complete the phases of their lives or left a regular gap between them to continue this situation. The gap in between was shining like a flaw on all of our faces, regardless of time and place, and we were taking on the face of the day when we would be destroyed for good. Even though these gaps buried many dead bodies among us, we could not walk around a sin whose sect we did not know, like a crime. I can explain this situation as follows: since the flaws covered by sin would still be wrapped around sin's neck, we could not expect the dirty blood coming out of this to give life to any living creature. Because waiting for this was the heaviest way to delay time or fall asleep. This hereditary gap between us was the scene of the pressurized blood flowing from all of our bodies. This was a scene so deep that one had to drown to survive. It was necessary to live to die or to be resurrected to live. This scene was a recitation that would not be pleasant at matinees, and the end of this recitation would cause the pain in our bodies to spread like leprosy to other bodies or cause incurable diseases with great effects. My soul has become the trickster of my face and is looking for a friend. My soul has become its own creator and asks if it is a hand for its troubles. My soul has become the heir of its savior and asks if this is a trouble. A moment I lived like a leprosy, now I am at the blemish on the forehead of my life, with a curse that my soul will shorten. 8th chapter. Loneliness is a naked law of sorrow. The light was the cover of a stage. Even though the cover was staggering here and there with various sounds, escaping from the volume of light, the loud sound had a connection with the smiles of all of us. Wherever the sound emanated, life would increase in size, and even if silence was 40 floors underground, life would accompany it from everywhere. If there is a truth in our breathing, it is that the loudest sound that comes out is silence. See, it's called loneliness. No matter what the situation was, there was always loneliness closest to life, and next to loneliness, there would only be oneself. What a great sin this is. I was saddled with a crime before it was even discovered. A person cannot describe the emptiness of the feelings he is used to, and even if he tries to replace it with an indescribable feeling, it creates a hunched appearance there. Only a language of loneliness could explain this destruction, knowing that it was so deep underground and suffering every second to rise above the ground. The language of loneliness was an empty sound. Dear reader, of course I have not discovered a new language. I emphasize this order because it characterizes our orderly pulling back and escaping from our toes that actually remain outside when we are thrown into life. Now I can underline my shadow, no matter how blurry it is. I was convinced day by day that my language was an empty sound, and the only concrete reason I could find in this regard was that I could manage to be so indistinct in life. Only another loneliness could balance one loneliness. The period in which I grew up was slipping from my heels with all its instability, and I was once again crushed under my own loneliness. The concepts we created were nourished by various laws in their own regard, and we were resurrected to live based on their world with the reasons we had here. Although being resurrected seemed the same as living beneath this world, the feeling of it was hidden in a depth of our soul that we have not yet discovered. Resurrection has never been felt before. It is possible that if we could feel it, we would not have to wait so long to die. A person could even give up on himself to pass his time. Being locked beyond this moment in my life caused me to live in a sinkhole at the top of the present. I was trying to dig up the past and was looking for a grave for the bones I had dug up from under the ground with my hands. Since I had been doing this since the day I was born, I didn't find it strange, and I was well versed in this situation. Even though time did not resurrect me, I was begging for years to take the sleeping bodies out of their own land and be their lifeblood, in order not to sleep. For this reason, I cannot deny that the bitter smell between my nails has not brought me any spring for all these years. As I grew older, the shape of the scent changed and I was able to grant it a language. The smell of an empty voice was fed by the screams of lives underground. It was the feeling of being able to reveal these screams of the homeless bodies wanting to seek a shadow for themselves. I was going through this situation because I could not deal with this state of mind. Chapter 9. On the birth of bodies. I'd been studying this scene for a long time. I thought it was no longer the time to shy away, but to act on it. This body that I had been carrying for years seemed too small for me, and I was falling around because I couldn't fit into myself. The big and small feelings I was spreading around were turning against me and I was living inward again. It is certain that people rot their lives in the pit of the smiles of their loved ones, but as you walk around this scene, it is impossible not to have doubts about which body this rotting life will become a grave for. Life had many forms. Since we remained motionless and aimless in a single shape for years, we wondered what shape this show would take us into, and since we could not see this, we became our own creatures. Every situation that affected us badly took our breath away. We were looking for the morning of the life stuck in between with blind silence, and it was already quite late. Every body carries its own funeral on its back. In previous times, he must have been so tired that he would attach himself to the language of the pit he found and create a new grave for himself with its language. If this world has a flaw, it is falling into a pit in the most absent-minded moment of a purposeless life, such as remaining silent in the shadow of useless identities. If the inside of this pit could have been a deep cellar of life, I would have extinguished my own reflection to support it with some justifications. Brightness was the act of our feelings, which had become dim and disappeared over time, becoming one with the sky and merging into the day. The light could exist as much as it took from everyone. If a place is illuminated, only the living there bears fruit. It is possible for it to be a living or inanimate entity. Not only plants bear fruit. The fruit of people is their feelings. Bitter and sweet are the feelings we bring out the most. It is at our will to cultivate or refute them. That's how cruel we are, but that's how conscientious we are. Only a human could do that. Dear reader, I experienced at a young age that apples are green and red. As I grew older, I became convinced that the green apple left a bitter feeling on the palate, while the red apple left a sweet feeling on the palate. It is ridiculous that I can no longer give up on both. If I bit one, I desired the other. When I look back since the time I was born, I understand that I have gained my experiences from my feelings, and my feelings are an indescribable feature that evokes different tastes in my palate. Since this is different for every person, I can't predict where you will find the most. Even though we were on the same stage, one of us loved green apples, the other loved red apples, and most importantly, since we knew they were both apples, it became impossible to feel deficient when we ate them. Life was evolving at this exact point. We were experiencing the same feelings as much as we could taste or remember in different colors. All of the things I experienced as a child kept me waiting outside of this scene. When I grew up, the place I opened my eyes was in the middle of a crowded procession. As time went by, I exhibited despicable behavior under various disguises in order to escape from everyone. Now I was looking for myself right in the middle of the stage. I realized that I had become an adult at an age that could be considered a child. I was waiting to be born again to escape from here. Only then would I have the opportunity to change places with myself. The fear of farewell was stuck in the cold sand of doom, trapped in the cruelty of change with the shock of the disintegrating soul. This was the heaviest condemnation of a lot of loneliness. It was an attempt to destroy itself with a genuine mockery of a worthless, dull and very old privacy. I am not trying to replace the underground with the above ground. I think I need a lot of time to achieve this. I see that it was quite tiring, but quite effortless, to bring our past, which was stuck in the farewell of the cover we put under the world, to the light of the present. I am reporting this from the underground of the age in which I live. I appear among a crowded pile with my own candle. Even though everyone who moved around caused my light to fluctuate, we could understand each other because my attitude towards them had a language. This was the faintest language of the past. Breathing in such a sinkhole made me kneel down and say goodbye every time. There was a concrete prison around a crowded loneliness. Inside the prison, it was crowded and quiet. Everyone's tranquility was very close to each other. For this reason, the farewells that appeared were waiting for their turn to reunite with loneliness. Concrete was a hard-walled privacy line. It was not clear to what dimension the cycle in the universe would pass from its current state. Anyway, the shape taken was just a reflection that repeated itself. All sentences were formed here and all shouts were heard here. Being able to see before this meant watching for death like a traitor who had crossed the border. I have never seen such a clean reflection flourishing on the earth. Even though I was a speck on this world, I was running to exist by violating my own boundaries. A line, a stop, or a sound did not greet me, they formed circles around me to block me. These rings came from the night of an incompetent crowd that grinned around my attitude underground. A candle is incapable of melting itself. But it is the candle that will be ashamed of its own fire in front of the mirror and will first burn and then go out. Chapter 10. We are all relics. Everything that belongs to the earth is left over from the night of the previous day. That's why we succumb to the longing for such an old taste. Everything that goes to the future was looking for the past, and because the road was so long, ideas succumbed to time and turned upside down. The bodies stuck in between were able to pass over the lifelines again in the sinkhole they were in, as far as they could free themselves. It was the most obvious silhouette of a futile effort. Many of the identities that were scattered had hidden their pasts in the corners of a diary. As they curled the page, they waited there, wishing their time had come. Dear reader, the biggest difference between living and keeping alive is how much we value our own desires. We will represent our thoughts best. Since our body is the closest identity to us, raising it next to an imitation would be the most treacherous attitude to display. I will explain to you with all my sincerity that we are all remnants. While my body was trying to hold on to life, bent double at the level of my head, it oscillated in the stage as if it was pouring roses on the ground, not realizing that he was saying goodbye to life in every move he made. There was something about me. This was an imbalance of scales that I couldn't fill. In the breast of time, it was a matter of hanging myself or resurrecting myself. This was the worry of losing myself in a swamp of endless grace. I didn't have anything. I was delirious in my absence. I would never miss me. Even if the most painful tone of loneliness surrounded my body. Dear reader, this is the debut stage of the underground matinee. It was here that I first hosted the pains that I sent off from my own body, and as a matter of fact, I was able to face their existence in life. I cannot deny that this is the most respectable thing I have ever done. From the moment I breathed in life, I have always been thrown or pushed. Because I had been pushed around for so long, I didn't know where I was coming from or where I was going. I had a lot of time to guess, but since I wasn't quite sure that you would manifest here, I wanted to run away as soon as I got the chance. I see that everything I ran away from actually created many flaws that cluttered the stage. I was now convinced that even imperfection seeks perfection. A person can also mourn pain that he does not know the taste of. Our applause was so loud that it could be heard even from outside the stage. Whichever of us was conscious, we were taking the applause upon ourselves and making preparations for our turn to come next. The fact that I or you had any preparations on earth was not a sufficient basis for living. In order to live, it was necessary to know that you were not in life. At least that's how I could foresee it. The stages of life must have been mixed up, I couldn't get out of the dimensions. This universe was a symbol of belonging that carried underground bodies to the earth. Here, we could not belong to something whose identity we were not sure of. Everything we witnessed was a fallacy, and we were deeply worried about our turn to grow in the illusion. Time had formed a deep crust in the sun's yellow farewell. Now it was as if I had become a slave to the conversation of a pale crowd in order to accompany my own reflection's farewell. I accompanied dozens of prayers here, the language of which I did not yet know. I couldn't be sure that my feelings wouldn't leave me. I had to find my soul before it gave birth to me. I knew my feelings were in a hurry. I had been keeping them in my own swamp for a long time. In order to get out of this quagmire, I had to be pretty transparent about what I was seeing. Because I would be worried about whether we could purify this water in any other way. Life is an illusion, and this order I lived in was an illusion within an illusion. If I had known that I would long for the past so much, I would have re-established the laws of my own order during my lifetime. I would wake you all up so I could highlight my image. I'm sorry, I neither have my own laws nor you have the power to wake up from this sleep. But I see that the fact that you have been panting for a long time will of course make you want to drink water desperately. Look, you still need yourself. Because this stage would welcome you to play the celebratory music of an unfamiliar invitation, no matter which corner you hit. In the privacy of your borders. Chapter 11. Main article of the fault law. This scene needed us, and all we needed was the shadow of our own existence. Our shadow would be enough for us. The souls mixed with the bodies were sobbing around the souls and looking for their shadows, and we were changing disguises on the stage. To exist so much in the midst of so much non-existence was a method that had not yet been tried. It meant ignorantly presenting it to those around you, regardless of the outcome. There was no need to present this. Everything visible on the stage is the main article of the law of imperfection. Now the universe was taking its laws from the flaw, silently forgiving it and blowing its particles towards the roots of our necks. The main article of the law of fault was written to avoid being seen. Everyone or everything in sight was so derelict that it would shine like a sin of imperfection without waiting for the sun to rise. If our feelings had any identity, I think I would like to hear how many laws were passed in the land of raw soil, which is thought to be the most flawed, how many races or ages of the population were born there, and in which direction the sin was set in there. But since this could not be an identity, we were traveling all over the world with the disguises we hastily put on. The most painful thing was that we were ashamed of life. We were all missing this. We don't know what fabric can cover our own embarrassment. Were we in such an attitudeless pain because the extent of privacy exceeded the borders? Or were we disappearing because the borders gave us a shy look? From which viewing bed would we want to watch the appearance of this dream? Dear reader, this cruise bed will not be filled again when we get off it. Even when she couldn't find the strength to call herself, our ticketing at the matinee of this pain causes her to get old day by day. We weren't the only ones looking for the exit of this matinee. I wasn't sure which swamp to launder water in, for all that was ours was getting old looking for its own way out. Imperfection was a law of order. Its main article was inspired by the ability of people who have not yet evolved in life to combine other bodies under their own identities. Because this crowd could only decrease around a single identity. We were running low. The defect could not belong to a single eye. If it had, you wouldn't have to witness every day how hard a single eye struggles in life. Here the clockwork made the earth a little dimmer. I must admit that whenever I tried to breathe here, I was again kneeling in the sin of a fault. I was the last to know about this situation. I could finally sit up as the dusty ground hurt my knees. It was a sound sleep without any sin. The world would put its law to sleep in the morning of an unborn son, and the universe would re-evolve where humans knelt. The universe would fill its own void based on the traces of humans. As a matter of fact, in the empty space, we would all gather under our own sun and greet the morning of farewell in the lap of our shadow. Chapter 12. Every pain that has no treatment. It is a disease of the age. From the moment I opened my eyes to the world, I was sighing about this situation and waiting to face it. I was searching for the night of the day I was born in the law of an order I had never witnessed. If I had found it, I wouldn't feel like I belonged to you so much. I was witnessing that all the sins committed during this time I was living were forgiven. Because a sin could only evolve so much. I saw this most clearly now, when I stood up with the anger of my own guilt. Night and day were the hallucination of time. Since there was not much light entering the stage, we could only leave this situation to a delusion. The day was the giver of the sun. The night is the moon. Our flaws pointed out the existence of a world flourishing under the stage. There was not a single thing that could be forgiven about this. Imperfection was a law of justice. I was the embodiment of this justice. The flaw of such a tired and weak justice could not leave even a line on anyone's cheek. Because something that had no feelings could not have justice. If we think that justice existed before we were born, whose conscience did this situation go through first? We wouldn't know. Somewhere there was more than one, or somewhere less than one. This is where the balance of the scales was upset. Over time, people's feelings blocked the compassion of this filter, and many diseases in it took on a hereditary dimension. If we all represent the beginning of a root underground, we could not expect this root to grow and expand in the same way. It is an inevitable fact that other roots will infiltrate the deep gap between them or infect them with a temporary disease. Illness is not a representation of the pain caused by the body. The real disease is the one that is not with the body. Because every pain that cannot be treated is a disease of the age. These diseases surrounded our entire environment before our roots were formed, and donated their hopes to our lifeblood. Hopes wait to be forgiven unless they come true. Because they no longer have any time to waste. The root of every body that has not yet been born has lived underground in many ways. We all poisoned our own roots under the ground so that our palms would not get dirty, the direction of time would not change, or we would not see the real thing. This situation has caused us to live without identity in the order of a world that we can never predict. Now I understood what form of mourning the inability to see takes. Every rootless beginning first mourns its hopes in other roots. The most dominant guest in the world is being stuck in the windpipe of an order that does not belong to it. If we assume that hospitality is an unnamed pit, the most inherited loneliness in the world began with us considering everyone but ourselves as guests. Because this is the most crowded form of loneliness. It is a hereditary veil created by a collective age. All the emotions we feed under this cover reflect the nausea of this age. I know that each of us was looking for a space to breathe on earth. But we need enough of the roots of our body to feed our emotions and scatter them. Not being able to get out of this swamp meant equating the day with the night. Not being able to feel the warmth of my body meant that I had been away from it for quite some time. Unfortunately, we were all exhausted from disappearing in this credit system. We were the dry body of the crowd or the window of a kitchen with flies. Although the surroundings looked quite beautiful, we were far from the glaring minor flaws, the raw fruit of the nut, and as a matter of fact, we could not reach it. There were patches on the crop of our body, resembling an old tablecloth. Worst of all, at every table we would be set up, a crowd of flaws would smoke around us to isolate us. No one could come between them. It's a coincidence. Since we were waiting for this, we would not sense any strangeness. It was not the noise of the unreal elements that poisoned our entire life with its nausea. This could not have happened. What really poisoned us was being alone in a situation. When a person is alone, he becomes withdrawn and unfortunately becomes rigid there. I regret to say that it reminds me of the appearance of a rotten fruit. Over time, you will understand that you have committed a sin by the dark stains that leak out. Even though a person does not taste as bad as the rotten side of a fruit, you can feel how lonely you are making him, her by the bad smell it emits. It is very dangerous for a person to become exhausted within himself. Because it has prepared all the pain it will cause you to experience as it will reproduce within itself over time. This is where pain increases, loneliness increases, and all flaws spread beyond the original like a stain of sin. See, this is the most dangerous kind of propagation of a sin. Because silence breeds inherited crowding and deep loneliness. Since loneliness has its own order, people who feel comfortable here will generally not want to be in this scene again. Because the content of this scene may be in the spiritual reflections created by people who grow out of their own loneliness with a cry of nausea over time. Look, people who have not been able to participate in life first want to multiply from their own blood because they do not know where they are yet. This thought will nourish them over time and make them feel weak again. I came into the world with a feeling of nausea. I believe that a feeling of nausea haunted me the entire time I breathed in this scene. I don't want to explain to you the inferiority I felt at this stage of my life. Even if you are witnessing the destruction of the world in disgust, forgive me for daring so much. But I told you that loneliness breeds within itself. Is the lifeline of a dead person quite calm and stagnant? I was too poor to realize at what stage of my life I was reporting this. I was a nausea of an identity that had not yet been named. Would I represent a coming into the world or a departure from the world? I can't figure out which shout to celebrate. Chapter 13. The Mist of Belongings Over Time. I wasn't an old, cold, stodgy teenager. It is quite common that you have not heard of a young man whose name is old. Everyone who gets older is called old, I know. I'm asking you, why were the feelings always running out in time in this order presented to us? The faces that appear are the reflections of a different era, too different to match their own images. I once said that it is not possible for every living thing that breathes to be alive. It is not possible for every old person to age. Let me explain this situation like this. Although time says it takes people forward, time takes people back. So much so that, as the aged bodies move towards their infancy, only their appearance resembles an inverted jar, but that is not all. Death does not happen as time passes, time fills up as death comes. Although the years went by, time was no more than an illusion that followed it. We were people who begged to be a point that had forgiven ourselves for years in a delusion. Now I see that I am moving forward as time passes, and that the future does not take away my age from me, on the contrary, it is evolving again towards the direction where my life started to give me my age. Since this road took a long time, my body in between was receiving blows with the sound of its own wind and being washed away from itself over and over again. Here, when I washed, I was spending a night in the bosom of my loneliness and finding the opportunity to meet the new arms of my body. It was a meaningless but meaningful description of the crowd passing between me and my body. I think I was playing the color of my loneliness red with the blood gushing from the eyes of the voices I heard as I opened the covers on the stage. This picture reminded us all of an as yet unnamed underground crowd of a warm red. The language of a loneliness is only turned inward. As it became clear, he would be offended by his own vulgarity and beg for his solitude one by one. Because only the language of loneliness knew that it would lose itself in the crowd or that it would not see itself. It is to know that it means to carry the carcass of a crime without spreading bad smells. It is knowing that countless sorrows close their stage in the guise of a dream. It is knowing that it means not being able to open a bed of ground on earth. Chapter 14. Crime Triangle. Crime is the lining of a soul. It is the most unruly disguise of an elegant, majestic and rather shy body. My mental state was as pathetic as a rogue disguise. Tonight, I was spreading the laughter of such a mistake. The place was surrounded by a smell reminiscent of the mortal auction, and we were finally partially offered for sale. If there was one thing we had, it was the lining of the costume that everyone around the stage used to shadow themselves, and this costume could only be bought here, as it had nowhere to be put up for sale other than at the mortal auction. Since everyone was asleep, only a nighttime hallucination of loneliness could probably hide this flaw. No dream that had not been met before could have a place on this stage. Even though the surroundings resembled a very cramped and dilapidated chicken coop, the variegated moods of the seasons were partly calling for a smile. Here, it was necessary to be someone's murderer in order to breathe. You didn't think I couldn't think of myself in such a selfish guise, did you? I couldn't be this stupid. Because this disguise is forced to perform its actions on the stage for a purpose, even if I don't want it. I couldn't help it. This is the plague of an age. Crime loves wet skin best. People who are stuck with wet skin have never left the dry crowd. They waited to dry in the corner of a wall belonging to him. Because no one could find it there, it accompanied a crime that was unfortunately forgotten, extinguished over time and then catching fire again. Over time, every crime has become a melody connected to the language of tranquility in the most rundown corners in order to hide itself. In order to hear it, one must know on which skin its wetness will dry. Only then, when the language of loneliness is next to another skin, will it not become the testament of a crowded funeral. He can't come. Only the tongue of a dead man could fulfill the truth of a will. Then we could all be saved from being torn pieces of paper floating around a sinful era. Absolute language forms the basis of every draft that is available and can be written voluntarily, and spiritual reflections reaching absolute language cannot reflect the reality of any draft. However, those who could belong to them could access the existence of absolute language and translate the language of their own reflection into another language. As a matter of fact, only then could man be understood. People who could not decipher their own language could not belong to any language or religion. They could only reflect the despicable role of sheaths fitted to naked bodies in celebration of spiritual reflections. I am sad. You were witnessing the images gathered around a mirror, hiding their wounds in this procession they created. In order for the wound on the body to heal, the poison of another wound was required. Undoubtedly, this situation caused everything on the stage to lose its meaning. Unfortunately, as we applauded this situation, the poison of every wound around was reaching the power to test us one more day. The order around the mirror was running in vague ripples for some celebration. The cluster of light that emerged reminded us that we had to carry out our actions in order to live. A person would first vomit his own shadow onto the place where he was reflected, and then spread it gently so that its scent would not permeate. As it spread, even if the order was disrupted, it did not matter much as dominance would be established. Narrowing the circle in order to adapt to a familiar environment would of course disrupt the order. The real order was to turn the spaces within this narrowed crime triangle into a living space. Only then would the lines of the lives kept at the corners of the triangle become clear, and there would be no need to overshadow the suffering of other bodies in order to save them from this crime. The crowded situation that has been going on for centuries has unbalanced the direction of the light and was waiting for us in the dead end of light for a dark day. Even though the world resembled a circle, we were in three corners within it. The extent of our pain supported this, as we could all use so much of our skills. The crowd created distance and the atmosphere was filled with nausea due to the fear of the crowd. Since the nausea mixed the smells of all of us, it was inevitable that after a while we would carry the memorization of the same soul. Each corner of the triangle was a representation of a crowded age. Only the corners of an era could become so sharp and solid due to loneliness. The main players who remained outside could not pass through the corners of this triangle, because they were afraid of the smell of blood that would flow from their flesh and could not attempt it yet. They were right, a plague should only end where it multiplies. To understand this, it would be necessary to go through everyone's wounds and examine the dried scabs there. There are shells that swell the soul as if it had committed a crime. All of our faults disappear in the shadow of these shells. Man has been able to hide all his flaws for centuries by burying them in the shadow of these shells. We realize that our mistakes from years ago are forgiven and the wounds on our bodies heal with scabs. The scab of a wound symbolizes the extent of longing there, and the imperfections are all the things we long for the most. Because people want to see the flaws the most. In order for a sinless heart to form, all hearts must beat underground. Chapter 15. Living like a flaw. The fault of a soul without a lining is that it has not yet passed through the crop of life. A previously familiar dream, it was undoubtedly his order. I see that before we were born, all of our milk smelled the same, and unfortunately, growing up with the stain of the same milk was nothing more than a repetition. Although the mother of all living things on earth resisted to pay the debt of milk, of course it was not possible for this to be the case. We could not pay the debt of a conventional order by keeping it alive. This could only be possible by watching a fight from afar. The reason why we could not pay our debts to ourselves was because we were kept waiting at the edge of our hunger for ourselves. Unfortunately, we have been kept waiting on the edge of nothingness for centuries. We had now become the identity of a century-long hunger. When one person approached us, the other's face undoubtedly became the most obvious embarrassment of the scarcity of life. Experiencing hunger or satiety would not be possible by going beyond a limit. If there is a limit, you have to doubt that there are memories to be lived. Because boundaries are always drawn to hide happiness or unhappiness. The unhappiness of the person who draws this boundary may mean your happiness. We can't know. In order to be included in life, we will first have to go beyond our own boundaries. Our overflowing parts will gather what belongs to its habitat and wake up to the morning of the order it created, while we struggle with ourselves. Life could be more than a prison that restricts our existence. Since I'm not sure about this, I can't cross my own limit. The world was the mirror of the earth. The mischievous mood of the day relieved the moon's anger towards the stars to some extent. The darkness shed a dim light on the shadow of loneliness, and this loneliness of the earth was blinding my eyes. I was quite tired. I admit, staying still seems like an activity that cannot possibly be tiring. However, this is not the case. I was exhausted because my feelings were blowing me away. Even though I thought I had been inactive since birth, I had finally gotten to all the places I couldn't go. Even though I couldn't reach it physically, their captivity was compatible with my freedom because the crowd around me was gnawing at my soul. I could live with my past, which remained stuck in the bodies of all the identities that carried my soul. I can live not because I breathe, but because I donate all the breaths I take. As a matter of fact, I managed to be alone in such a crowd. As I was left alone, I was putting together my scattered pieces and separating my body from my flesh. I knew that my birth would end in separating myself. The further I moved away from the language of the body I was in, the more I would have the opportunity to inhale the scent of everything that belonged to me. As I thought about these, the shadow of my own reflection changed shape. It was slowly becoming more distinct and more ostentatious. Don't think I couldn't take my eyes off him. Of course I could take my eyes off him. But its scent reminded me of a freshly bloomed lotus flower at the tip of my nose. It was not possible to keep the lotus flower alive in an arid place. That's why it sprinkled quite well near my tears. This anguished state of mine was the lifeblood of a lotus flower. The soul taken from me was caressing the soul of a flower. Only the closeness of the sun to my body could eliminate such anguish. When daylight penetrates a warm skin, the whole world scatters the sins that it hides with the embarrassment of that skin. I have concerns that we were all woken up that morning. Now I can't predict what idea this situation might form around. Of course, this was not a situation where I could dominate the whole world. We were waiting for all possible times to be gathered from the shadows of unexpected bodies and sprouted around. This waiting was the most secluded journey that came between us in time. Since it was not possible to see anyone, we could not foresee what situation we could say goodbye to. All the hooks threaded through a crowded finish line scatter their thorns for unfinished grass in time. As they disperse, life welcomes the night of an unevolved day with the nausea of its own order. This is an unusual finish line. The most painful one is waiting for the dimension of the nightmare to spread over time. Because a nightmare can be frightening not where it is seen, but where it wants to appear. It is possible to observe this in human life as well. I see that life is writhing on a slope. It is inevitable that our relatives, whom we trust or hope to trust, will be waiting at the end of this slope. We probably couldn't get into it, as we'd witness how hunched over they were waiting when we turned around. Because seeing was not the issue. We've been running from finding the real culprit who made this plain. Instead of scattering our eyes, we were burying ourselves in the space where we felt good every day. See, what a pain! In fact, it was their attitude in our lives that created this slope. Whoever is in our life as a steep abyss, we take that form in order to be able to pass around that abyss or accompany it. Yes, now I was guessing that the slope of life consisted of what I wanted to see. When I looked around carefully, this slope would turn into a plain. All the slopes in the world symbolize an ending established to hide the losses in life. In order to get out of this ending, you have to be in the sinkhole. Only then can we avoid being the victim hidden in a crime. Deep sinkholes on Earth have been opened to people who want to accommodate their own wounds, and since it will be an underground guest house, I have no doubt that all the prisoners will gather there. Chapter 16. Tradition Jewelry. Tradition is a trace of identity that has been stuck to the lining of human beings for centuries. The more durable the lining, the stronger the language of the habitat in which it is located. Dear reader, this is the heaviest reward given to human beings centuries ago. I couldn't make sense of what I was feeling. I didn't expect anyone to understand this situation. He was lamenting every day for the time when the dry branches of my feelings would be resurrected. He was feeding his own prayer in a fault, and as he wanted to grow, the blunders in life were giving seeds around him. Everyone's fight is as heavy as his tongue. When we identify our eyes with our mind, we will understand that the full crowd around us constitutes the integrity of body, mind and soul. When one was missing, the gap in the other would expand to a surprising extent, and the vague identities that entered would cause this hole to become wormy or its roots to rot. In order to preserve this integrity, it was necessary to be sure of the identity of all channels passing through. This could also be the biggest sign that we will mix with time into our own blood. The most fundamental reason why this sinkhole, which gained volume and expanded over time and turned us into a breathing ruin, was that the channels in which we would live or let live until we reached this age would not be cleared by anyone. Unfortunately, I am conscious of what a suffocating sentence you read. Body, soul and mind always have an integrity in human nature, and when this integrity is disrupted, you witness the false proliferation of identities around. As this unity was formed, a crowded waiting gave way to the last act of an untimely sob. Even though it had a universal dimension that when a route comes to an end, another route will emerge, of course, making sense of it would be an exit that we would want to bring to an end. The source of life is hidden in our essence. We should also be thinking that resources can harm us when we are taken out of our essence. Life consists of three corners. We were the most anonymous form of the bodies trying to leak from the edges of the three corners. The basis for our extinction and making the world useless until this time was because we were hitting the corners of this triangle. Although the coldness of the crowd around us may lead to a hunger for a warm smile, after a while we will get used to it, and it is only a matter of time before we lose all other human emotions. My skin had lost its warmth, and I was finally quite cool. I guess because my whole body has been kept waiting since I was born, I couldn't predict how many more stops were left, and I wanted to spread my emotions that were stuck in this swamp around as soon as possible. As a person becomes aware of himself, he can feel how precious a living thing he is. It took time for all other possibilities to reach us from refuting their own branches. Because if he had achieved it, he would not have been able to get out of this pile of abandoned identities. I avoid worrying about the existence of an absolute world. But I see that when the size of our breath reaches the power to reach us beyond borders, the reflection of the real world will terrify us all. The emergence of new identities in the order of our own borders reveals a dialectical approach. Even though a storm cannot contain this much silence, we will be waiting in an ear-raising crowd as it will conflict with the elements of its own belonging. We exist as much as we can disappear on Earth. If we can disappear, it means there is someone out there who carries our existence or leans on the crowd around us. Only then can we pass the triangle we have established for ourselves through the faces of others. Dear reader, the nerve endings of the crime triangle passed through the corners of our belonging. It meant that whenever we moved or stopped, we said goodbye to ourselves with a perfect silence. See, this is the quietest apocalypse. There is no counterpart to this crowded noise in the universe. If your body is not yourself, you have to be your body. Only then will your smile and hunger be satisfied. The areas that we consider to be protective, over time, become areas that squeeze us and cause vague pain to spread around us. What is possible is that these areas mostly constitute the areas where we feel the safest. Identities that have never experienced the feeling of trust have mostly begun to dig holes in their lives here. This is a kind of pain of agony of bodies that have decided the extent of their pain and the extent of its spread. Since unhappiness spreads here the most, it may become inevitable for our underground roots to be breathless. Over time, congested roots mix the debris flowing in the veins of other roots into their own blood. This is the most insidious disease of extinction over time. A plague can only multiply so much in plain sight. Unfortunately, the beginning of every plague is due to the morning of another plague. You should have been able to tell from the disguises that the splattered identities affixed to us, what plague we were covered in. All the lines on our body carry the road map of our actual body. When we can understand this, all reality will unravel itself, and you will be able to eliminate the pain within your own self. It is normal for breaths to coincide with each other in a mixed pattern. Of course, I won't go into depth about this. But over time, we will learn which regiment's breathing is a tradition. I didn't know which tradition living belonged to. But I can say that traditions have become more evident with the reflections of the old times taking shape today. From the moment they were born, people have searched for a piece of jewelry to wear on their souls and belongings in order to make sense of their own reason for existence. This is the most privileged gift they can offer themselves in life. This is called tradition jewelry. All living things on earth have sought the scent of his body for years to celebrate their reason for existence and to give him a piece of himself. Dear reader, I should point out that while everyone's identity will be different, some of us may not have a unique identity yet. All prayers belonging to the past have been interpreted as traditions today. Since the traditions would disappear in time, all accepted prayers would first be celebrated here in the complex line of our own body in its time. Because in this way, we would not refrain from hosting ourselves in the judgment of conscience that we created over time, and most of all, we would want to show ourselves. It is not known whether the traditions matured in life and could not find a place to hide the accumulated mourning. Tradition is the silentest form of a scream. Because this is a spiritual reflection, not a physical one. Since this reflection had no relatives, it was impossible for its roots to do any harm, such as poisoning or destroying us. Did this order we live in represent the continuation of a tradition, or was it the embarrassment of a mass of untruths created by identity confusion? We couldn't all be more united. Not only the remains of human beings have accumulated on Earth. All the spaces in the universe are guest houses lined up to host the ruins leaking around. It is doubtful what will spread in an environment where civilization and barbarism clash. For this reason, protecting our consciousness and belonging will be the civilization of surviving that conflict intact. As a matter of fact, civilization is worth the weight of all of our blood. Please, let us entrust it to the past in order to forgive all the wrongs that have been committed against us in an attack. As a matter of fact, traditions are only the genealogy of the century to which they belong. Chapter 17. Moral Satire. The moral framework is the most prominent element that reflects the conflict of a social order under the name of civilization. When a society wants to gather the civilization it wants to create under a single roof, it first considers the quality of morality. As a matter of fact, in a framework based on morality, it will be considered impossible to appear rough. Just as the flaw is reflected in our eyes in a situation where it will be seen the least, the moral element reflects the opposite. If you think that there is morality in a society, even if that society has a nail, it will not be visible to you, and it is ridiculous that you think that there is a moral understanding in the order created by that society. Because, according to that society's understanding of civilization, morality has evolved in this way, or the society has included and enacted this poor situation as a moral law in order not to disperse in a certain order. Unfortunately, the concept of the law of imperfection that we are using today is incompatible with the solidarity of morality. A moral society, body, mind and spirit knows the reason for its existence, and in order not to go beyond the form required by it, it overflows all the lines that are imprisoned in life. While this is the most universal element, it is the most basic element of the age we live in. An absolute life does not contain a hereditary void, because the main thing is to put the touchstone in its place. The law of imperfection, which we can see as the garden of rotten bodies, has also affected the current arrangement of morality. Laws and their distribution over the years constitute the most obvious source of sins. This is also the case in today's age. Since the morals of all of us depend on a single point, all the faults that arise may seem like the greatest moral sequence. The only thing we need to be aware of is what will be the place of these laws, which have evolved over time and tied to tradition, in our lives. The fact that we do not take up much space in life was due to the fact that we were buried in the pit of our own emptiness every day. If there is a hole in life, we should all be breathing in this hole. If there is no such pit in life, I am sorry that all the laws in the world only accompany their own order. I do not believe that there can be morality in the reflection of an age of justice and limited life. Dear reader, the morality of such justice is better achieved by the chair on which I sit. Forgive me. What is possible is that as time goes by, morality also ends. Morality has been replaced by our hereditary loneliness, which we carry on our shoulders like a stain of sin for centuries, and the customs that we do not want to ignore the embarrassment of our conscience while doing this. Dear reader, the traditions that represent our past keep the sparks of the feelings to which our conscience belongs vigorous. But it is necessary to be able to put everything that belongs to life in its place. If one is missing, the other drags us downhill and an irregular image emerges. Since it would be very difficult to look for morality in an irregular order, it may seem quite easy to look for morality in an order. In a complex pattern, we all just breathe. In a correct order, actions replace breathing. Over time, this situation causes our body not to shed its own shells in order to regain its identity. I guess I don't have enough time to explain all the negativities that morality has on us. However, I believe that morality does not have an attitude, that it will be shaped by our conscience and that the origin of this reasoning will always be questioned within us throughout our lives. For this, you need to be able to perform an action, not just breathe. It is necessary to throw that old seed called living to the edge of the ground. Chapter 18. On Body, Spirit and Mind. A synthesis lulls unrealistic compromises around various misconceptions. This situation is an attempt to destroy the screams of all the rotten things that we avoided showing to each other while we were alive and to establish a new order in its place. Because only the possibility of a synthesis takes us silently around delusions, and when we manage to pass there, it will be inevitable for our body to meet all the other parts. I can say that only the inevitable end of silence supports a happy situation. Our body is not just a drawstring bag filled with stuff. Since we are sure of what is inside it, we have not refrained from searching for ourselves since the time we entered life. Instead of scattering it around, we should not leave it hungry for a pinch of breath in the land of belonging, which is the main thing. The body is the warehouse of the soul, it contains a lot of light as well as a lot of disasters. But for years he does not speak out, he hears what the soul tells him and puts him into action. The mind is their season. The instinct that seems the most stupid among them is the mind, because it knows when it will rain. What has not changed for centuries is the weight of knowledge. Because knowledge is a concept that may seem light to one person but very heavy to someone else. It is the purest power of mind, body and soul. If the mind preserves its true meaning, it will always be powerful. He has no quarrel with gaps in time or distorted identity confusion. A soul with otherness carries within it the residues of all bodies on earth. Over time, these residues destroy us because there will be no place left for them to feed. Every living thing that exists in the world and can breathe is suffering from the pain of death. This pain is a residue for those who will be born. This is a cycle. At every stage of life, mourning a death or celebrating a birth is essential. Because in this cycle, either happiness would increase or unhappiness would increase. We know that this silence will be ended by the nausea of a criminal procession. We were all worried that our turn would come to tighten the gaps in the world and keep all the rules in life alive. In the universe, there is only one soul granted to everyone. How is it possible that a unique soul could not meet itself in a place where it does not belong? Body, soul and mind complete all corners of a triangle. As they revolve around life, the crowds of the world will cease and the imperfections will not wait for the repetition of a cycle to be forgiven. The body, soul and mind triangle is a clock that represents time. Time ends when they separate. In the worst case, when one of these triangles is missing, it is very difficult to ensure the continuation of the human species. In order to ensure the continuity of the human species, body, soul and mind must multiply from each other and embrace life in a synthesis. Those outside the crime triangle were able to represent the main actors of life. In this age, body, soul and mind were hosting the burial of another birth. Therefore, there is not a single moment when we can belong here. Those who are outside the triangle have not yet had to go inside, as they can claim their belonging to the world. The parts of us that protrude are our flaws. Since the only thing that exists in this cycle is the illusion of unreal elements, the flaws have created a power from all the residues left inside. I see that there are many elements in a person. What strengths or how low attitudes do we have that materializes us in life? When the body, soul and mind are not in life at the same time, it may be possible for the light burning in the room to destroy the entire house as a result of a giant explosion. We were the remnants of an age that could not survive in this dwelling. As a matter of fact, we made a lot of effort for it. We had to reproduce in the cycle of our own flaws and expand the face of the century we live in with the remaining parts of our bodies. The voice of a funeral is heard beyond another century. When the corpse is to be transported, all the soil on earth dries from its germinating roots and leaves the void of life inside out of respect for the body that will mix with its roots. This symbolizes to us the most prosperous emptiness of a perfect birth. Chapter 19. On the birth of bodies. Being exiled to the world is like being addicted to gambling in a debt trap. You need to save your body, which has been hanging on the thread of life for centuries, on the verge of collapse, waiting for the day when it will destroy itself in order to be resurrected again and again. Death is the shelter of the underworld. Some creatures on Earth have experienced that they can breathe more underground during their lifetime. For them, in this underground order, everyone will be looking for a relative, so it is possible that it will be our turn. The effort of this order, which scrapes time to meet us underground and keeps watch at all times, represents a void that protects its borders on Earth. What is possible is that these are elements that are enemies to each other. Birth and death. No burden is heavier than being born. Even if we are not aware of it, the burden we carry on our back turns our balance upside down throughout our life. When we are a little short of breath, we think that it is necessary to leave this burden to another side and we make an effort for this. Being born is a vague mist stuck to the human body. Some of us were born to multiply from our own blood, some of us to dry all the blood. Actually, there is a birth, but since the body, soul and mind have felt the pain years ago, we think that all the screams call for a single prayer. Death alone is meaningless. To deserve death, one must be born. In other words, it means knowing the direction of the breath and taking action. Dear reader, all actions taken in life are to invite death. Since the desire for revenge of the visible morning will not last until another spring, we have to take different shapes from the moment we are born. This is the ritual of mirroring the guilt triangle. The crime triangle narrows the most between birth and death. As a matter of fact, people feel nausea in their stomach most at the time of birth and death. All bodies that come into the world only have one day to live. One day represents the birth of all the days, and one day he makes all his days live as much as he suffers. The universe has listed all the rules it will present to us since the moment it was formed and managed to present them to us in a single day. The world with a face also has 6. There are dozens of naked bodies underground waiting to get rid of their disguises and mix with the world again. Look, during the time we live on Earth, we become unconscious due to the nausea we feel from the smell of underground bodies. Whenever a voice is heard from the underground, we must first be frightened by the sound of our own bones. The earth was trying to collect the breaths coming out without knowing its direction and make them grow on its neck so that they would not go to waste, and it did not expect anything from the earth for this. Even though the bodies taking shelter underground tried to resurrect every day so that their turn could come, they were disappearing deep inside as we left our traces in the places we walked. It means disappearing from within. A birth could only be so badly received. Death does not occur only by cessation of breath. Not every breathing creature is alive. If he were alive, he would multiply over and over without feeling sick. Waiting to be born is the hardest way to die. Because if you know that there is life, you should also know that death is waiting for you. This is essential for the universe to renew itself. Traditions, bodies and even identities have been breathing for centuries with the hunger for the day when they will be renewed. I ask you, which age's way of life is this, or which prayer is the representation of waiting for the day you will disappear in order to breathe in an age? Before my birth, I did not know that life would only want to build a dead one, or what would await me. If I knew, I would want to be somewhere between birth and death. A life that knows it will perish does not want to attain the power of a life that knows it exists. Because it is that power that is the real culprit of all nausea. Chapter 20. Formation of Spiritual Theses. The souls around the triangle of life are like the shirt of the body. I think that if we cannot feel the existence of our soul and protect our identity to reach it, we will not be able to understand in what dimension we can take shape within the triangle of life. The reason why the shirts covering our bodies have been mixed for centuries is because we have all been using the same fabric for a long time. Bodies that extend beyond the living triangle underground have traced the shirts they will wear on earth. The essence of wisdom brings the weight and pain of this pain. Since they cannot stand this, they scatter everything they are aware of around with a feeling of nausea and wait for their bottoms to burn until they turn black. As they cook there over time, a frightening smell spreads around. These scents spreading around are so sharp that they make some of us sleep, while others wake up. Bodies that want to reunite with their souls, which they have never been able to reach, must prepare for death years in advance. The saints are the people who did this centuries ago. They boil their souls in a copper cauldron and create a new language with all the sounds that emerge from the pain. Since the spirit and mind of each period will be quite different, the reflection of their identities within the period will also be different. Wise people are those who punish their souls with pain every night and make them feel like fools while doing so. Since the spirits were quite unpleasant among themselves, only this situation could restrain them. Bodies underground wait for their turn to live, and they are quite ruthless in doing so. Even though the real guardians of the order may not have thought much about it, all living creatures can feel the shirts they carry on their bodies. I can explain this situation as follows: soul and body are always at war. The reason for this is that it is obvious in which year the body was born. But we do not know which period our soul is a shirt from. So that when a death occurs, a birth will take its place. When a living body disappears, the shirt it has been carrying for years will already be carried by the breath of another age waiting to be born underground. This is a cycle. The evolutionary cycle of spiritual thesis. When a soul disappears completely, all funerals are held in its honor. As a matter of fact, it will continue like this. Because only the weight of all the funerals on earth increases the pain of this situation. Since I was alive, where was I carrying it so much? Chapter 22. Limitation of mystical prayers. The fact that possible traditions have formed a circle under the shadow of a prayer for centuries has caused our pains in life to wash up on the shore. If there is a transformation of the eternal shackles, it is the lifeblood of the genealogies that form mystical prayers, accumulated underground. As a matter of fact, all of the emotions we try to suppress will be nourished even if they are underground. Since emotions will breathe under the roof of the tradition that mystical prayers have maintained for centuries, they will probably vomit blood on our faces at the point where they will overflow to the earth. The situation of life overflowing to the earth and evolving within humans indicates that the foundation of an age whose roof has not been formed is time to collapse on humanity. The interior of a period that does not yet have a roof will be quite crowded. Since there will only be one cluster around, it's possible we'll all be crowded in there. As the gaps of life overflowing from within us pass into each other, we separate from a single branch and create an identity other than our own loneliness. This is related to the limitation of mystical prayers. If there is a crowd around, everyone is trying to hide the gap in the middle. A crowded age depends on the arrangement of prayers that gather around a roof and change shape from day to day to hide flaws. If we are in a non-crowded, unpretentious community, everyone has the opportunity to confront themselves at any point they want. Because a crowded age has opened a deep void within. This void is the legacy of future humanity. A modest community has a limited diversity of life. Since we would move beyond the lifeline when we were in this community, we would probably have the opportunity to reincarnate ourselves. As a matter of fact, an unlimited crowd gathers only to obscure the traces of sins around. Prayers are an invocation that will hide the articles of the laws in the source of life. All humanity has reflected its feelings according to the sequence of prayers. Every prayer is the tranquility that creates a mystical devotion. It is that tranquility that feeds all bodies that have not yet been born. The night we were exiled to the world, all eyes were on each other. We couldn't make out which era's nausea was dragging us. Chapter 23. Unconscious Reflections of Thoughts. The classification of thoughts emerges with the hunger of identities. If an identity has survived from its roots and extinguished the fire of shortness of breath within, it means that it has not been wrapped in the cover of the outside world. The fact that identity nausea in life dominates their own order indicates that their thoughts are formed around only one identity. All of the identities have been reproduced for centuries in order to fill or hide the void of a human concept in life. It is possible that all of us could only be veiled to the extent that we were left bare, since all identities were reproduced for the same purpose. This situation has caused us to be unable to keep up with the outside world over time and to become increasingly narrower in the circle of causeless extinction. Since all the living things growing inside could not come out of their covers, they multiplied all their identities with the mottled loneliness of their eyes, and as a matter of fact, they fought for years to hide their own faults in a circle. For centuries, as sons of the old world, we sought the breath of our voice in the hereditary void of solitude, and it was the unnoticed agonizing void of a veil. It was the mask of our thoughts that we all covered up. As these masks integrated with each other over time, we were all suffocating in the face of our loneliness. Living inwards means purifying a breathless body from the life water underground and resurrecting it. I knew that the world had a different color. But because we were covered in the color of a fault, we had been hiding the mourning of this fault for centuries. Since this effort caused us to grow into ourselves, we could not find the line of life. We were undressing as we struggled in a net that we could not draw the boundaries of. This feeling circulating in my blood was the emptiness itself that formed the basis of all the pain in my body. I was growing naked inside me. As I grew older, my body, coming out of its shell, was multiplying again and again with the hiccup of a plague in its loneliness. This was the darkest disease of the society, which was afraid of the loneliness of its thoughts and tried to fit itself into the void. To think is to underline with a deep calmness all the times that have been around complex nausea and that have not aged for years. Because the most obvious silence that forms the identity of a society is the act of thinking. The more a person can think, the more he can breathe and fill the void that belongs to him in life. Unnecessarily proliferating veins around a root will cause blockage of the channels to which that root donates its life water over time. But when we could think with our own identity, the way to hereditary loneliness would be opened and we would destroy the mourning of time in the fire of our tongue in order to multiply there from other bloods. The veils that have been laid over identities for centuries will only be lifted from the face of the world with the splashing of other blood. For a storm will sweep the face of all the sins in the universe and bury them in the neck of the earth so that they will sprout underground. The chief loneliness of a plague is itself, which it has not been able to reach for centuries. We could refute this loneliness that fell into the language of one age in the leprosy pit of another age. As a matter of fact, it happened. All the gaps left by a mass of identities were balanced by the nausea of an era. The outside of the triangle of life, which we have expanded all around since the moment we were born, was narrowing due to the scattering of the souls that were left unattended while we were alive. Because wandering souls would have the freedom to contemplate a catastrophe, they probably attached themselves to the diversity of life from unconscious sources. The prayers of the bodies rendered helpless within this crime triangle filled with weakness were now poisoned in the conscience of another language. Chapter 24. Leprosy Spot in the Mirror. I was seeing it. The simple line of flaw was multiplied in the midst of my forehead, in the middle of a crowd. Unfortunately, the silhouette of a faint smile had faded the color of my tongue. The more I was filled, the more I could overflow myself. After all, the language of the hole a leprosy entered was more important than where it emerged. I was becoming familiar with myself from my reflection in the mirror. For centuries, we have been able to hide the reddish color of life in the shadow of a birth. It was loneliness waiting to be reunited with itself after being pulled out of the pit of the age in which all the possibilities of life existed. As we remained inactive for years, the traces of insects crawling on our bodies signaled the beginning of a new era. As a matter of fact, I was watching my reflection in the mirror with amazement because I could follow him. Just as this hunger could not be described, this prayer would not be accepted either. For a long time I watched my place in the world. I was remembering the salt of this rush. As I could not hide my surprise, thousands of shadows were emerging around the mirror. My face was disappearing around your face. I was getting smaller and smaller, until I could no longer exceed the size of a point. I was on point after all. Only one point could stop the breath of a languageless void. My language would emerge as the direction of my breath turned towards me. Then, a single breath would eliminate all the fog around the mirror. My face was quite sullen and I had a hunchbacked appearance. I got a new soul from the smile of the mirror, now I had a place to sleep too. The misty fog of my fortune drowned me in the noise of this blemish. I no longer had the strength to hide a fault or to grow from the blood from which a pus came out. I wanted to water my roots to multiply from my own blood. My roots, which had been hungry and thirsty for centuries, had become a creditor that would not let me go. All my life, I forgot that my eyes were dry because of the cavities around my eyes. My body, soul and mind had not been able to accompany me all these years because my roots had dried up. I couldn't predict which era's pain would take over this shame. Come, give me a hand from afar. Oh my tongue, whose account is this, from the trap without punishment? I knew that the pain of my pain was from real sin. A bird without branches would have no reward. His lucky black fabric would be taffeta. I was a leprous soul, I came and saw. I died without being able to hide the walls of a soul. I suddenly realized that the stains on the mirror were caused by the curse of my body. If there is a defect around, it means that a sin has been accommodated there. The inside of the wounds resemble hellfire. What is possible, even if you cannot see your surroundings, you will hold the spark of that fire on your nape throughout your life. It is our guest identity that was given to us before we came to this world. Unconsciously, at every stage of life, we suffer as if we are in a circle of fire because of the pain of this identity. The reason for the rotten smell coming from my body is that the nape of my neck has not caught fire yet. Even though we are not aware of it, wounds have caused humanity to take on its own pain and be granted a void in the world. Just as not every wound will represent a pain, not every pain will represent a wound. This is a start. Dear reader, the reason why I am trying to breathe today, shaking with sobs close to your shoulder, is because you had the courage to give birth to me. I was taking this breath from the carcass at the finish line of your identity that you don't want to see. If you had chosen not to see me, this crime triangle would probably be multiplying under our feet. Chapter 25. Let life overflow from your soil. I said to myself over and over again, if a root dries under the ground, it is only a matter of time before its flaming canes emit a bad smell. I was saying. As a matter of fact, I had not encountered the warm face of this identity for centuries, and I had tried to escape from its bad smell forever. Since our breath first dried our crop, the vapor of every breath that would go to our roots would be enough to keep us strong. The pain of every pain reminds us of the mourning of the crime committed for centuries. That is why the veins whose souls were not happy could not match their own nausea in the smell of other blood, and they managed to overflow to the face of this age. Every life has inequality. The underlying reason for this inequality is the chaos of our dried bodies, which materialize within us and destroy us over time. Feelings, desires and beliefs were left imperceptibly to crackle in the sun. It was crumbling to pieces in a corridor that would wreak havoc. It is inequality that is so barbaric that it would not trade a corridor for a sun. See, barbarism could be this despicable. Between existence and non-existence, in the middle of two lines, we would burn and go out like a dark stain of fire. It was clear that vital or periodic actions in life could not satisfy me. It was not important that an action could satisfy only me. What was important was that all humanity, which had crossed the line of death with its breath, could be satisfied. The best barbarism is underground. A dark, rosy complexion, a bearded swayer, the mocking smell of the village title deed that has fermented for years. Only these could accompany a barbarian. I had been alive this way for 26 years. The only thing that could accompany me was the bad smell of a move. The description of this smell, if not equivalent to the guilt of a collarless shirt, reminded me of the collarless longing of my own hunger. You should have seen, we were all sworn to perpetuate an insect species. We were consuming this age, which we sought with our own hunger in the most barren lands, by rolling in a narrow corridor. Dear reader, growing into yourself is the most painful pain of all time. This is a form of a disease that has not yet been diagnosed. Because if the nausea of an age accumulates in front of all people, it means there is an invisible well around. Things that seem permanent to us remind us that life is temporary. If there were no time period, everything visible would not be retained as a source for years. For centuries, life has been worried about scattering around to feed itself in inaction. Although it was quite disturbing to be in such a timid life, every punishment for which the crime was not committed could weigh heavily on a person. Now, I was forgiving not myself, but your inappropriate attitudes, so that my breath could return to me. Only in this way would this cycle be filtered and we would all live as much as it hurts. I think this would be the most just and equal execution. An execution is granted not to the criminal, but to death. As a matter of fact, he was sentenced to death, execution and life imprisonment. Chapter 26. The space between earth and sky. In order for all humanity to understand life, it had to manage to get out of the gap between the earth and the sky. Only then could he live or understand that he was alive. The existence of the world will continue as the concept of earth and sky entrusted to humans begins to be digested. I would like to explain this situation as follows. Since we could not claim an extraordinary existence, we were looking for a living space for ourselves in a cramped order, but we could not find it. Dear reader, only your voice is the spokesperson of a cramped order. First, you avoid the crowd that forms in the middle because you will be frightened by your own voice. If there was life around you, the resulting space would consist of the border between the earth and the sky. However, there will still be a parasitic crowd around a parasitic creature. Only their own crowds can fill their gaps. Because when we all stop being a parasite looking for our own living space, we will believe that life revolves around a triangle and the whole crowd that spills out undresses to satisfy its hunger for the earth. This is the whole belief of the fallacy that humanity has heard throughout life, and this whole will only seep into us when it is broken into pieces. Fallacy is a gambler's attempt to materialize the laws of life, perhaps out of longing for the necessity of life, while mocking the situation he finds himself in the triangle of life. This is the backside of the most rotten and tarry identity. Don't be surprised. Since we were trapped in one spot, we were spreading our poison on all the plates in front of us, unaware of the other parts. The worst part was that our own body secreted this poison. We were hospitable people who hosted our own carcass in our bodies. Unfortunately, anything beyond that meant an order that could never be established. The most tiring part of being a guest is the one with yourself. Since there is only you around, this is the most pointless fiction of the most meaningless effort. When I was bare and naked, I was able to create a cover for myself and forgive a sin to my changing limbs in the course of the actions I desired. Of course, I wasn't holding on to a sin. But this hospitality had to have a farewell. Since my name has been mentioned as a guest since the moment I was born, this forgiveness could only fill the void in my life. I was in a ruin in the middle of a century to which I did not belong. The more I moved, the more my body bled. The longer I stood, the more I disappeared, and the longer I remained silent, the colder my shroud became. I was an apocalypse between the earth and the sky. A dull flesh spread on a faint, cold and sharp marble. 27th chapter. The decay of individual beliefs. It is impossible to doubt the existence of a discourse called loneliness. But I want to tell you how hot or how cold the cap of solitude keeps us. There is no such thing as loneliness. There is becoming simpler, becoming simpler. I know, at one point the two serve the same meaning. What was the last time you fought to change the ending of a sentence in your life? If you could do this, you would understand that no two words can mean the same. All crimes in life are committed by the universe to hide people's flaws. This is also the case with loneliness. Mankind has worked, produced and reproduced with all its might for centuries. There are two underlying reasons for this. Fear of being simplistic and the decay of beliefs' lack of belonging over time. Sometimes we may want to multiply in a single spot. Since the universe is an endless cycle, there are very valid reasons for not being simple. As we unconsciously follow the cycles that occur around us, we simplify and divide ourselves into two separate parts. Dear reader, this is the most painful of proliferation. Because a hungry victim will start to eat his own flesh first. The crowded void of this age has gathered us all under a fire without our knowing it, waiting for its time for its feast. A loneliness is aggravated by the fact that we scatter all the nausea we have hidden throughout life when the time comes. I was having doubts. Since all parts of ourselves were entrusted to someone else, we were trying to relieve the pain of this pain with the discourse of being alone. Every time we can't get beyond a repetition, it will leave it in our arms for us to give birth and grow our own longing. You would probably have to go through the throes of this loneliness alone, as the crowd around could not catch up with him yet. If a nausea and a misdemeanor have not met each other, it means that the roots of the plants that are growing around have not been cut yet. The best solitude is with yourself. The other state is the one that will enslave you. I am sad. The greatest plague of this century is that a society that has been put to sleep and made up carries the rank of slavery on its temples. Faith has been spread across the world for centuries with the hope of hosting a society in order. In other words, it is so that they can draw the centuries-old boundaries of the society and find living spaces within an order where they can live their beliefs that they feel belong to them. Not every space under the ground is owned by human beings. The limited periphery of life has a contrary and incompatible waiter. At the border of this perimeter, only those sins that want to rebirth themselves are accommodated. That's why the place smells of the burning smile of hatred. Being lonely or lean is considered the biggest sin of this age. It's ridiculous that I sincerely wish we had all committed this sin. Because a society that cannot find itself is a slave of a society that cannot become isolated. To be alone means to resurrect and resist. I would like to explain this as follows: if there is a crowd, you don't want to take action, because you know that when you take action it won't be seen or it won't matter. But this is not the case with a lean person. A simple person feeds himself every day to hold on to life as if he were in his mother's womb. As she feeds him, his pain increases and he actually manages to come into the world. His world is different, real and ordinary. Every person who has not found his own reality is a threat to the future. This danger can only be overcome when the soil is broken open and a new universe is established. As a matter of fact, a plague can only be dried this way. This is also the case with beliefs. The existence of the world depends on the fury of our pain. Would the sun turn red and the earth turn red, or would the earth turn red and the sky turn red? The sob of an endless nothingness entwined my hand. It's a winter prayer time. My hands are shaking, it's coming off the bone. The sound that comes out blows me away. A faint euphoria of loneliness surrounds my body from farewell. Tell me of this suffering that embarrasses me. My body is naked, cover me, I'll go. There would only be one life I would actually live. Without realizing it, all of our lives were gathered in a single lane. Every time we did not clear the road, it caused another loss. 2. Strangely enough, as feelings are forgiven, flaws are washed away from their sins. 3. From the moment I entered life, we could not find a cover for my naked body, and we knelt at the other end of the stage, under the shadow of our own prayers, to disguise it. As we bent over, our bodies became naked and we made false disguises for our bodies with the costumes on the stage. Only we could welcome a plague so wholeheartedly. Even if continuing this while we are all in the grip of a disease may be smeared with ignorance. 4. Life does not have a direction, it has attributes that follow or imitate it. Because my surroundings were quite limited, I could not reach myself and could not witness the situation I was experiencing. I was being reborn and dying from the pieces scattered around. It was inevitable that this cycle would continue as long as I was here. 5. The cycle of life limits our existence and the circle narrows here. The fact that we were looking for ourselves where life left us was displacing the mind like a shame that has been making people suffer for centuries, and the face of stupidity appeared here. 6. I recovered quickly and was buried quite a bit. A swamp could promise me this much eternity. This cry of eternity was now an aggressive farewell gesture. 7. Disappearing is not like being hooked to a time. Time finds its direction, but you always remain there. Even when you're gone. 8. The pain could not have been greater. There could be no one waiting for the pain. It was a bitter, helpless emptiness. He had to get up from where he fell and hold on to himself again. 9. In order to get to the other side of the stage, I had to be inside the stage. Accompanying a situation that I couldn't be in, from outside, reminded me that I was alive. 10. Time is the real owner of an order. People are the supporting players of time. Not being seen means not being aware. A person wants to be the most obvious, not the blind, of a situation that he is aware of. 11th. The smell of the disguises I was wearing was forcing me to look for a new day in the pit of anxiety of extinction, and I didn't have a face to strive for, even if I had many faces. 12. Living a middling life didn't mean we wouldn't perish. If I had had the opportunity to meet myself, I would have taken back my borrowed breath and never attempted this situation again. 13. I witnessed that the world resembled a stage, in the only room where I could breathe. Here, I witnessed all bodies, big and small, resurrecting or saying goodbye to themselves here to the sound of their own laughter. You have witnessed this many times before, but you may not be able to see the situation clearly because you have removed this patch at the first opportunity. As a matter of fact, everyone here lived their lives according to the abundance of loyalty of their conscience. 14. There was nothing to applaud. It couldn't have been very believable for this to happen when there were so many things to regret. 15. Being a white dove does not mean that the dove is white. Being a dove doesn't matter much if you can't find out how many whites come from blacks. 16. I cannot deny the fact that the reason I have been searching for myself all these years has something to do with being left out of life. The closer I got to myself, the further away I got. Because the crowd on the stage came between me and me being human, and while I was going to enjoy my body, I was able to take a little bit from everyone and be a fool. This was stupidity. 17. The puppeteer in my mind dragged me to the dark end of a game I didn't want. Everyone was the same here. I couldn't choose myself, and suddenly I was doomed to the course of this game again. Everyone was trying to celebrate their existence with many styles under a single-minded attitude. However, although one could not be selective in the style of a show where we were all the same, those who were used to it witnessed that they were repeating themselves or that everyone was gathering other souls, unaware of the order in which they lived. It was possible, it was the last thing worth waiting for a conventional order to get us forward. 18. Madness sobers up all the sins of the mind at one point. In order to exist, it is necessary to be able to separate the soul from the flesh or to have lost consciousness. 19. There was a thought that was missed. As soon as a human found a void, he could reach the strength to smash his own larvae into the face of the surrounding crowd. Hereditary diseases took shape here. In the void pits of people. 20. Time would flow as long as I performed my actions. If I paused, I would have given him the power to destroy me because he couldn't find a place for himself. 21. I didn't know if life had a destination line. But this line was drawn from within so much that I could sense it. We were all following in each other's footsteps. It is possible that our paths had not yet crossed with their roots. 22. Time loves tranquility the most. As we repeat each other, it will be inevitable to submit to the calm of time. Time would fill all the gaps left between us. 23. I was celebrating the reflection of an accepted prayer. It wasn't a forever celebration. Whenever my voice was cut off, I buried myself in this room, as if mourning my breath, in the skirt of a farewell. My voice was so foreign, my bedside was so familiar, and the name of this farewell had yet to hit any pillow. 4. I took refuge in the justice of an age that I had not yet witnessed, and I was waiting for freedom to be able to participate in life. 25. Time covered life with its secret crowd, and the surrounding bodies moved away from each other with the thought that time was going backwards. 26. We would embrace the longing of a world stuck between bars, how many captives, to the bosom of justice. It was quite a challenge as the extent of the nausea was beyond our fingertips. 27. Here, I was out of my line. I've never been so into justice. 28. If life belonged to a wall, first of all, I would like to hang the pale smiles of the faces around me close to them. Since the extent of this longing would be very heavy, I could not withhold it from them. 29. Since the light on the stage did not coincide with me, I had not yet had the opportunity to meet myself. I found the solution in displaying the attitudes of the shining faces around me. Indeed, it did. Now I could be a puppet. I had to be forgiven the morning of the day I was born so that I could see myself under this veil. I should have been born from one body now. 30. The thing called sleep is a supplication. The worst pain that sleeps time is sleep pains. The heaviest losses begin in the agony of sleep. The journey of time determines the difference between living and not living. Now you can sleep. 31. My laughter spontaneously wrapped around my legs, the crowd around me pushing me into a deep sleep. In order to survive, I had to offer myself a role in life. Probably, being out of life was the only thing that cheated on me. I understood. 32. The stage was very crowded. We could not see how many faces this crowd consisted of, as we were all gathered under one light. 33. Since the original sin arose, the sound of spiritual prayers had increased, and civilizations had forgotten their desires, which they had toiled in life, in the embrace of darkness. Sin was considered the most attractive aspect of evil. Only one crime could shed so much light on the surroundings. 34. The crowd breathed shadows without identity. We will have learned at the close of the scene that we are crossing our own footsteps in every street we step on. 35. A person wakes up every morning to pay his debts to time. 36. Every person must first fill the void he lives in, otherwise it is an inevitable fact that many voices will echo in the void. 37. And the trees rotted their branches in the shadow of men. 38. Since the departure of this matinee would coincide with sunset, the crowd would shout out the greetings of his body longing for a candlelight. 39. As I open the curtains of my room, sins appear before me. Sins hide their crimes in my curtains. Then, he suddenly makes a wish. Leave me alone and I will prostrate. 40. From the moment he is born, man searches for a space in which he can live. 41. You all owe me happiness. If I have happiness, I destroy it and suffer here above your happiness. 42. I heard mercy emerging from the pit of indifference, in the tongue of a blurry eye, while persevering in the soul of life. 43. The reason my vision has been blurry for a long time is because I haven't heard my own voice. This order meant donating a breath to the edge of life and death in the eternal void of an age that is not surprised by the imbalance of even the balance. 44. Once again, a human being witnessed the birth of a human being. This situation will be the same when it disappears. Birth and death are not just names, they are a time that is connected to each other. Because a human being is a creature stuck between his body and soul, which tries to exist in order to disappear and fills its time to prove it to human beings. 45. In an absolute world, the mirror is not viewed from only one side. Because it was impossible to pass a circle through a circle. 46. Have you ever been able to find a name for your own loneliness and become friends with it? People disappear the most in crowds. Because the crowd has a voice. Since this voice will drown out your voice, you may not be able to find the strength to speak or take a stand. I repeat, my language was an empty voice. 47. Everything that grows bears fruit in its own shadow. 48. Only the plague of another age could balance a loneliness. 49. Bodies that came into the world without identity first started life by shaping their own pain. Everything that takes shape becomes an image within us. All happiness and unhappiness exist for people. This feeling is their identity that will accompany them throughout their lives. 50. We were accompanying many prayers around a community whose language we did not know. The reception of collective shouts led to a murder at the end of the day. 51. This age had only one face. This face represented the centuries-old loneliness of happiness towards him. Everyone, unaware of the image that belonged to them, was shadowing other people and sighing for the morning of the day when they would rise at the foot of a prayer that they did not know the language for their sins. 52. I cannot say that my disposition was heartwarming. I was looking at my reflection in the mirror like a spot of flaw. I have never felt so angry at myself, and I have never disguised myself as such a foreign stain. I was in the middle of an era, I was its farewell. I always said goodbye to myself. 53. Vanished feelings have their own shelters. There are special rooms there for souls who kneel down to be included in life. Since we would be mourning the death of our own shadow in these rooms, being surrounded by a well-behaved crowd would help us reunite with ourselves. Man is born in silence, because the more sound there is, the less the volume of death. Since the flaws of the crowd would bear all the sins, we would not be able to notice the echo of death and we would live like a tramp stuck in our body for the rest of our lives. 54. I was in a centuries-long wedding procession, amidst a soulless age. The place was so empty it reminded me of the rooftop of a casino. Only if you are a slime can you feel this free up there. I'm reporting from underground. All crowds first hide among themselves, then in a wedding procession, in the night of a lifelong scream, they leave a faint signature under their own reflection, and I'm sorry, this is called suffering. This suffering is a hereditary pain of crowding that started before you were born. We can start celebrating this era. 55. Surreal events must disappear in order to be purified from desires. All the traditions in the world are not for a reality, but for a reflection. Even though everyone is concerned about reflecting their own cup onto the body of another era, this situation has turned into a raging disease as it takes shape today. In order to get rid of this disease, we had to build our lives according to our own selves. Only then could we be guests of the criminal procession in a guise that would not make us feel like a freak. 56. If there is a pain, everything that will be born waits for its time for an action. Because pains herald new births. The biggest mistake of this century was that one had to hide another flaw when one was in pain. I'm sorry, this is the age of necessity, we were all meant to be each other's pain. 57. If another moon were rising in the sky, maybe the sun's view would be in a different direction. As another sin was committed, the color of the moon vomited. As we perished, the universe shunned the deception of our sins. Everything gave up its color, living things were waiting for their turn in the shadow of their mothers to be reborn. In what generation would their mother's rebirth begin? 58. He would not accept any coolness, the shadow of a farewell overflowing from life. 59. This disease makes me feel a warm pain in my body. The smell on my skin was dizzying. The smell of a burnt body could not do anyone any good. Every day I was scattering the ashes of my own fire and arranging invitations for them to jump over it. I guess it was a farewell ceremony. Worst of all, a farewell could be this crowded. 60. In the emptiness of a crowded age, plants would rot and all living things would perish. Everything that would be born in this void was waiting for the time to say goodbye to it. This was a mistake, only congregations could live in such an order. The sky was underground and the earth was in the sky. 61. Disgust was the greatest blessing bestowed. However, the plague of this age could be concealed by a nausea of disgust. In order to remove this veil, it was necessary to be able to share the same feelings equally. 62. For centuries, I was looking out of my window through someone else's mirror. All the faces passing by were turning their heads, making me feel like an idiot. As a matter of fact, they were right. The hatred of not knowing myself was sitting on my face. I was able to become akin with myself. I was the most brazen form of disguise. When I was a relative of my own, who did the fictional reflection of my body belong to? It's so painful. The extent of this hatred would leave a mark on my crop. 63. Man's birthplace in truth is where he decides to donate life water to the land cut for him. 64. Only when you were considered a fault could you repeat yourself and destroy yourself. 65. If the mask of the world were enough to hide all the flaws, first the earth and sky would take shelter in the guise of this deception. The rogue and cynical prisoner has an opinion, and that is the fear of living what he has achieved. Breathing is a skill. I am reporting this from the second scene of the life I live. Every breathing body searches for a space to breathe, but since the similarity of the surroundings fills all the spaces, there is not a single space left in which the possible pain can take shelter. 66. Being able to suffer alleviates imperfections. Every pain opens the bed of another soul. For this reason, the weight and size of each pain is different. Errors have persisted since the time humanity discovered itself. As long as man exists, he will seek the cause of everything. I would like to explain the reason for this as follows. Information cannot be found by searching. Information is available upon request. All wise people are people who have been able to fill the gaps in life and give meaning to these gaps in line with their own desires. 67. If you have a pain in your body, it means you have accepted a sin there. It's in your blood to make you feel helpless in your happiest moment. Over time, you will be able to bury the pain in your body in the shelters you have opened for yourself. When you realize that you are hiding yourself somewhere underground, the debris of your body will have already formed a triangle of defects. 68. Warm-blooded bodies, whose pain is still fresh, are arrogant towards hot, bloody bodies that have no pain. But there was a fact they didn't know: he was able to stay alive because the warm blood became a tree for other bodies to shade the suffering he experienced. He was considered unborn because he had not yet met himself. The blood of every living creature could not be warm. That was not possible. 69. The past is the state of hunger that has been hidden for centuries in the blood of a body whose roots are unknown. 70. It's only a matter of time before a broken-handled soul scatters around. The person who will carry it must act gently, because the soul will wait for a suitable time to open itself. When death opens its face, all bodies will vomit their souls. 71. Being a family does not mean being compromised. If he had come, it would have been possible for this table to be considered my family. Being a family means blowing away the trees from time to time so that the fruits of feelings that can be considered distant will spill around. So much so that when the tree is blown, the ripeness of the nuts spilling around will either add flavor to the palate or leave a stain on the palate. This is related to the health of a root. This is the action that must be taken in order for the tree to survive and produce healthier seeds. 72. Hope is a crime that kills time and remains a friend while doing so. Everything good in the world is the shackle of a sin. At the end of these shackles are the good deeds done rather than the sins committed. What is possible is that the rustiest part of the chain is always entwined with sins. Because one day, goodness will lose its meaning so much that it cannot be considered a sin and will infiltrate us in disguise to the point of celebrating its freedom. Evil cannot find a place for itself over time and spreads around. 73. We hope to keep alive all the gaps that we could not fit into a mass matinee, in the underground spaces, at the mercy line of a land. In this guise in which we lived with desire, even the mercy line of the land was on equal footing. I saw that we were too poor to give life to a soul. The real fault was that where everyone was the same, the spiritual reflections were the same. 74. All the bodies on this stage were gathered to represent its main actor. It was possible for this to happen even if our personalities were the main players who avoided imitating us. 75. The only thing that was real was the direction in which my tears flowed. I have never been sentenced to such wet skin before. Even though it wasn't me, we had to wipe each other's tears with our naked bodies in order to escape the situation I was experiencing. Only then, in celebration of our own mourning, could we be resurrected. 76. We were all worried that our tickets would be cut off at the box office to attend someone else's show. Our turn was as impossible as our participation in this show. You and I, in short, were looking for a master to carve us with the enthusiasm of becoming a wooden puppet, and when we looked for it, we had already taken shape. The end of this row meant the end of the matinee. Since I couldn't see the exit, I couldn't remember when I entered. 77. We agree that the earth is round. But I see that the image of the world to which we feel we belong resembles a crime triangle. There is a sharp slope around it, every corner is covered with a feeling of debt. 78. We all attended this celebration with a mirror in our hands. The mirror was trying to reintegrate with the reflections in the fragments bouncing around the stage. A crowded space was repeating itself as the pieces splashed around filled the bottom of the spaces above the stage. Everything visible carries an absolute sign for invisible things. 79. Just because I was on this stage didn't mean I belonged here. It meant we were all supposed to be here. 80. Everything that existed was a cycle of repetition. He could not be the founder of an established order. 81. This scene was reminiscent of underground bodies spilling out onto the surface. 82. During our lifetime, we surrender to time everything it can take from us. Unfortunately, since we pay the price for this tranquility with the fine lines that create crevices in our bodies, this does not matter much. 83. Everything that belongs to us symbolizes our existence. Regardless of our smell and skin color, what represents us the most is what we cannot do with our free will, our wishes, desires and disappearances that are entangled in the language of our own chaos. 84. There are many feelings in the world that need to be filled. Look, life is a town of flaws consisting of a bag of feelings, and moving forward as quietly as possible in this town is the best thing to do. For this reason, everything that cannot be explained aloud waits for the day to be read. 85. Have you ever found a name for your own loneliness and been able to be friends with it? People disappear the most in crowds. The crowd has a voice. Since this voice will drown out your voice, you may not be able to find the strength to speak or take a stand. 86. One day makes you live all your days as much as it suffers. 87. Before bodies come into the world, the laws that will complete them are clear. Each person is covered with a covering of flesh to sanctify his light. 88. Language is the root of a body. The roots of every body grow as green as its tongue. 88. Language is the root of a body. The roots of every body grow as green as its tongue. 90. Every silence hosts a crowd of its own. The noise of this reflection turned me into a person I never wanted to be. Finally, I could be the crowd of this noise. 91. I wanted to tell you about the pains created in the body by an emotion that has never been described. But I see that we were able to drown in the mourning of our own blood because the extent of our pain gave birth to us all. 92. Since all emotions are trapped in the crime triangle, we had to multiply around the three corners. 93. Because I thought that when I found myself, the people around me would give up on me, I was living and dying, suffering in all the disguises that did not suit me. 94. It is the most acute fact that all the gaps that we cannot characterize stem from the hunger we feel for ourselves. 95. Since the main actor was off the stage, he could see clearly what disguise he was putting us in. 96. In this framework, you should be able to see how all living things on Earth are decreasing as they infiltrate. 97. The world resembled a giant mise-en-scene. However, we all had a limited living space as we set up tents inside. Sorry, we were running low. 98. I was finally able to distance myself from my hand, which I had been protecting like the entrusted flag of a ruined country. Because when my hand touched another body, it would be hungry for the absolute. I was crossing this out because it would be a state of dissatisfaction that I could not tolerate. 99. If a frame has reached a point where it symbolizes the nausea of breathing bodies, I think we should all sit down. I believe that only when we sit down will prayers be gathered and accepted in one dimension. 100. There was a picture of this age. The surrounding peripheries could only fill or reduce the gaps they created in the middle of the crime triangle. The The crime triangle was like the most nauseating form of a possible war. Since there was no living creature in sight, all the blood lost in this war was in the form of a blot of milk. If pus starts flowing from somewhere, it's time to reach the absolute. You should be able to see it now. Closing. Don't think I'm irritable, of course I'm not. I'm just celebrating the many reflections I keep inside. I think I'm entitled to this much. Since this matinee will be a celebration of my rebirth, I didn't know which line to put a period at the end. I was waiting to take root like a tree under the ground. Sorry, I couldn't. My wish, as a person who has been hidden among you for years, is that you can be assured that I have not yet lost my sanity. Because it seems like those around me will be worried about me losing my sanity. I wouldn't want to tell you what kind of soul pit I fell into over time just to taste my own breath. It's hard to imagine how horrified it would make me to show my body. However, I did not want to live like a worm wandering around this age. The inappropriateness of things that belonged to me created a state of nausea in my body. I didn't expect that I could vomit so much. Forgive me. I am calling out to you from the farewell of an outfit covered in white and a body that longs for itself. You probably didn't see me because I was off stage. However, I have been greeting you from the very beginning. I hope you can see me more clearly now. Only the veil of disguises that will make me feel the extent of my pain and will not refute my desires can hide me. I was thinking that you could see me because you were with me. For years, I worked with the enthusiasm of continuing my life in the most productive way. Now I stopped, and when I stopped, I realized that there was no trace of myself left, and that was why I was searching for myself. When I searched for my soul, it was nowhere to be found. He had become a reflection that repeated itself for years in pursuit of an imitation. I was quite young when I realized this. Dear reader, only my shadow reflected on the wall and I accompanied me during this period when I spared my mind in the hope of healing because I was disturbed by the eyes looking around me. My shadow was quite close to me. Since he alone accompanied everything written, there would probably be a pain underlying some of the words. Please don't worry. As a matter of fact, every pain will hurt when the time comes. This was the celebration of our reflection, and this pain was the most audacious prayer that will never be answered. This work you are reading did not come from the soul of a remnant, because no one believed that he could have a soul. For this reason, if you think of taking a stroll in the body of a soul, wandering around with this work will relieve your nausea. You can be sure that the closer you come to me, the more I will appear to you. I was watching you on the wall of a mental hospital because I couldn't participate in life. You looked pretty pathetic. Your body is your mirror, your soul is a night lamp silhouette, a mockery of existence and non-existence. It is the weakest side of your mind. My body, mind and soul formed the corners of this triangle. You all reminded me of a crowded funeral procession without me. Don't think that I'm helpless because I'm left out. There was only so much breathing possible in the age of a crowded void. Anything more than that meant an unforgivable triangle of crimes. You can take off your glasses and rub your eyes. Forgive me, I can't remove it.